guest speaker. So
glad you invited me. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Should be fun.
Yeah, it will be. I'm sure of it. I've got a few questions here, so that everyone knows. This session is scheduled for first 30 minutes of you and I going back and forth, the conversation, and later we have 20 minutes for possible Q&A, for people that want to ask. And if there are no questions, then we will continue the conversation as usual. First question, then we'll start with the basics. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about your background. So what are your studies? How did you come to be involved in working with infrastructure and startup businesses and enterprise level companies? And how did you become later a consultant in that?
Sure. So I'll give you a quick background. Started my career at Harris Bank in Chicago. And yeah, I'm pretty old. So back in the 80s, if you remember those guys, half you guys probably weren't even born then, computers were just becoming relevant. I really was a self-taught programmer, taught myself how to program. And I ended up using that skills to automate the entire trust fee department of Harris Bank. And so from 85 to 92, that's what I did. It was really cool. It was a lot of fun. But from there, I just kind of grew into things. I had a neighbor that came to me and said, hey, I have this idea for a network for the futures and options industry. Now, this is pre-internet. It didn't exist. We're talking 92, 93. So we built a four, if you guys ever saw it, the little small 3.5-inch discs. We built a 4-disc install set. And we had some major players in that. We had the London Financial Futures, the New York Mercantile Exchange, the New York Mercantile, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, excuse me, Smith Barney, and a handful of boutique firms all talking before the internet and passing information back and forth. In 96, we moved that to the internet, and we were doing database-driven websites back in 96 when everyone else was doing brochureware. And in 1998, we actually took a small piece of that technology, which is the ability to upload a file from your PC to our servers and get to it from any other web browser. And so in 1998, we invented what we all know today as web-based storage. We were the first ones to do that. And the crazy part about that was it took 18 months to get our first 1 million users. But then the hockey stick curve started. And it only took 13 weeks to get our next million and 11 weeks to get our next million. And we were a worldwide sensation. And so from a scaling standpoint, it came with a whole set of problems that we had to kind of deal with and work through, which is a lot of fun. We could talk about that if anyone has questions. But from there, we sold out in 2003 to companies called Motorola, you might recognize, EDS, which was a major server provider, and EMC, which is a major storage provider. And so I moved on to consulting, and I started helping companies automate their operations. And then I'd go in there and I'd look at what they were doing and saying, okay, what can we automate to help you with your processes and do that. And since then, I've had probably half a dozen of my own companies. The majority of those had some kind of software development piece into it. I built games for marketing companies and, just kind of automated stuff for different groups. I was helping one group that was kind of doing almost like a GoFundMe for smaller amounts. So I've always been involved in that kind of technology background. And now I do more coaching than consulting. The idea behind that is that consulting is usually 1 or 2 at a time because that's all you can handle. Coaching is a completely different animal where I can actually help 10 to 12 comfortably at a time and help those companies kind of figure out where they want to go and grow to the next level. And so that little company is called Pull the Chute, because the idea behind that is if you ever have gone skydiving, you start at 14,000 feet, you jump out of a plane, you're falling at 120 miles an hour. It's hard to breathe. One little movement, you're out of control. Everything's happening so fast, you can't see where you're at and you can't see where you're going. But at 5,500 feet, you pull the chute and suddenly you can breathe again. You're in control. You can see where you're at and you can see where you want to go. And that's a lot like businesses today. Everyone's moving so fast that they need to take a moment to pull the chute, take a breath, feel in control, see where you're at, see where you want to go. And that's where I come in and help them kind of figure that all out. So I know it was a little longer probably, but there's a lot in there And there's a lot more, but I was trying to get through it as fast as I could. But that gives you a good idea of my background. It's pretty well-rounded.
Pretty impressive, I would say, and I really love the explanation on the Pull the Chute name. So that's great. And well, throughout your experience, I'm sure that you've witnessed a lot of scaling up companies. And I want to know what are some of the common misconceptions about that process, about the process of scaling up that you've noticed over the years?
So a lot of times what happens, and I've been with companies, my own company, I had to scale up, and then I was with a company that went from 2 million to 24 million in a short 18-month period. And we had to scale them up, right? And one of the misconceptions is that, especially from the owners or the people that are managing, is we can just throw bodies at it and make it work, right? Which can work, but you got to have a foundation set up, right? So you can't just throw people at it, because now what you're doing is you're spending twice as much time bringing them up to speed and making sure they know what's going on and all that stuff. One of the things that I learned at FreeDrive was it was really important as we brought in people, because as we were scaling, it was crazy. We were just trying to bring in programmers to help us, and project managers and testers and you name it, But one of the things that I was able to do was set up a foundation that as people came in, we kind of put them through the understanding of what FreeDrive was all about. Or in the case of the gentleman that went from 2 million to 24 million, we did the same thing, right? So as we brought bodies in, we spent the first couple of weeks just kind of training them. And for most people, that is the most frustrating thing. And I get that. But in the long run, it's the best thing that you can possibly do. If you can take time over and schedule time each day, do an hour and a half each day, and spread it out so that you can still do your job, and give them things to do. So what I always did was I'd say, okay, here's what we do and here's how we go about it. I'm going to give you something to test on, and you're going to run that. And we're going to look at that and see if you understand what I was talking about. And then we go to the next piece. And that really set a foundation, which is the key here. Having a strong foundation of who you are as a company, what it is that you're trying to do, where you're trying to go is key for most cases. And I think that just throwing bodies at it doesn't always solve the problem. It actually adds to the problem.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely. Like I was reading a little bit about specifically like some of those misconceptions. It's fairly common. And well, now that you've talked a little bit about your experiences, what has been your biggest challenge in terms of scaling up operations and infrastructure?
Probably the biggest challenge is staying ahead of, as you see things starting to scale, try to envision yourself several months out and figuring out where you need to be, and try and stay ahead of that curve. In most cases, what happens is people don't realize, and the curve starts happening, the scaling starts to happen, and they didn't really plan for it. They didn't see it coming, because they were so like this. They had the blinders on, and all they saw was in front of them on a day-to-day basis. Again, this is what I love about Pull the Chute, is because I try to get people to say, okay, where are you at today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? And where are we at between those two gaps, right? And let's plan for that. And that can be a huge struggle for people, because they get caught up in that day-to-day. And then all of a sudden that day-to-day becomes that day-to-day and a half, because, it's like they're putting in so much more time. It's like being on that, the treadmill. You're just going, you're pedaling like crazy, but you're going nowhere. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I see, and that I've actually lived through. Again, I'm not saying anything that I haven't lived through personally, trying to deal with some of this stuff sometimes. And that's how I've learned is, look, I got to kind of look out a little bit, 3 months, 6 months. Let's see where this is going. Like when we went from 18 months, we had our first million, and then we hit 13 million in that next, or 1 million, another million in the next 13 weeks. We had not planned for that at all, because we had the blinders on. But the moment that we got there, I kind of took a step back, took a breath, and said, okay, the curve has started. How do we do that? And we set up processes like, great example. So FreeDrive is all about uploading files. And so we had a bank of servers, right? And so we set up processes that if those servers were all being utilized at a 70 to 72% utilization, we added 4 more servers. And that brought everything down because we had load balancing, right? So that brought everything down. And then as they started to rise up, and as they got close to 65, 67, 68, we ordered more servers. The moment they got to 72, we added 4 more servers, and we ghosted all of the servers so that we could just have a disk, set them all up. So it was like, literally took us like 2 hours to put new servers online because we did ghost disks that just created the whole operating system. But again, those are things that we thought about after the curve started, and we reacted to eventually. But the challenge is making sure that you don't have to react behind, that you're always in front of it a little bit.
Right. So I'm going to skip a few questions because you touched on a very interesting point, which is the planning. So do you think is there a perfect moment to scale up? Is like, how can anybody realize when this moment will arrive so that they're ready to switch to the growth mindset? Or, is it something that we can actually be ready when it happens, or it's something that happens suddenly and you have to act accordingly?
Great question, and yes to probably all that, but what I like to do is remind owners and remind people that are working, don't forget to look at your numbers on a monthly basis and see where things are at. Again, what happens is people get caught up. We don't look at the financials good enough. We don't look at the number of users, depending on what your company is, right, and what you're doing, number of clients, all that. Maybe clients, you'll notice that a little more. But if you're in, like we were at Free Drive or in that other company I talked about, it was all about users, right? And so watching the users and watching the trend is an important thing. And again, there's systems all over. All you gotta do is run a report and look at it, right? And you can look at it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Back when I had Free Drive, they didn't exist like that. So we were manually tracking all that stuff. But nowadays we can run reports that'll just kind of tell us that, and we should be doing that. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day stuff and forget about to look at all these things that are right in front of you that are going to give you those indicators. And that's the key, I believe. So, paying attention to those numbers, both financial numbers and user numbers or whatever it is that you're doing, client numbers, are just so important, and just making time. And that's the key. People just don't make time for this stuff sometimes. They're like, yeah, I'll look at it tomorrow. I'll look at it tomorrow. And it keeps getting pushed down. And then all of a sudden tomorrow comes and they're like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? And that's the key. So again, one of the things that I like to talk about now is take an hour a week and just plan it, put it on your calendar. And that's the hour that you look at all your reports, look at your numbers, see where you're at, so that you know where you need to go.
Great advice. So I've noticed also that you have been in different industries in your experience, not only tech. And so my next question is, have you noticed any differences in the difficulties and challenges of scaling up between industries? Like, how does the tech industry fare in comparison to other industries that you've worked with?
I feel like tech, we can react faster to issues. I did some stuff in the health industry. To get them to move is like, dinosaurs. They move very slow. It's like the Titanic, probably a better one. Just move. They can't move fast enough. For me, anyway. But the struggle with that is that if you don't react fast enough, and I want to preface this by saying it's not just about reacting, but it's about planned reacting. Okay. So when you see things happening, take that step back, bring in a couple people, don't work in a bubble, talk through what's happening. It may not be the perfect answer, but it might be the right answer. Right. And then make the shift. But don't sit back and say, we'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll talk about it next week. And again, I believe tech, in all my experiences, I've been able, through a tech situation, been able to react fairly quickly to situations that arise. I'll tell you a quick story. When I had Free Drive, you'll love this. We were giving away a whole whopping 20 meg of storage space when we started out back in 1998. And we were on an Oracle database, and the database locked up. And so no one could get to any of their files. And we probably had better part of 7 to 8 million people using it. And so we were down, right? And so from a tech standpoint, it's like, okay, what do we do? So it took about 18 hours, believe it or not, and we finally got it fixed. We actually had to use an undocumented command in Oracle. Oracle was actually in our office. We had to use an undocumented command to open the database back up. And then what we did was we reacted by, from a technology standpoint, giving them 50 meg of storage instead of 20. And we were able to do that, but from a tech standpoint, we could make that decision quickly and then make that happen quickly. And so then people were all excited because they got an extra 30 meg of space back then, and they thought it was okay, no problem, we can deal with that. But if you weren't anything other than tech, that would have been a marketing nightmare to try and react to it and show people why that happened. So yes, I believe, you know, tech is my favorite to react to challenges because you can react quickly.
Okay, great comparison. So talking about the challenges, the difficulties that, you know, come with scaling up. Obviously, you sometimes need a lot of resources to do it. And so my next question would be, is it really necessary to raise capital in order to switch to growth mode?
Through my experience, I'll say it this way, you know, again, not knowing what the revenues are and how much you're scaling, my initial answer is going to be, you need to have that in your back pocket. You don't always necessarily have to do that. I just wrote a whole blog about, you know, we got this potential recession coming in line, right? So if you see things starting to happen, don't wait till the last minute to try and figure out how you're going to pay for it. You know, maybe go get a line of credit for whatever you need to do for, right? Like, you know, whatever it is, or have a couple investors that are, you know, you've been priming so that if you need them, you can pick up the phone and go, hey, here's what's going on. You might want to jump on this train, right? But don't wait till the last minute, because all that stuff takes time. You know, if you're gonna get a line of credit and the recession hits, you're in trouble. Have the line of credit sitting there now. So if the recession does hit and you need extra cash to get through it, you have it. Same with investors. You know, when we did, you know, Free Drive or a couple other ventures that I had, I always had, you know, investors that I was just keeping up with, you know, touch them, talk to them, tell them what's going on, you know, and the good part about that is when the scale hits, that's an exciting time for them to jump in. So it's an easier decision for them. When you're kind of, you know, doing this, you're kind of going at a, you know, small increase, it's not as exciting. But when the hockey stick curve hits, you know, when we had Free Drive, we had to raise a ton of money because that's what happened. And it was so easy because we had, you know, several investors that had been watching us and realized that we were for real. And then bang, you know, it was a no-brainer to pick up the phone, go have a meeting, and then, you know, 2 weeks later or a month later, we had the money.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then does scaling up mean to actually grow in all areas, or do you have to sometimes cut out some other areas to grow important ones, I would say?
So when you say it that way, the word bootstrapping comes into my head. And I'll tell you something, when I was raising money for one of the ventures, I was trying to raise $2.5 million. And the investor said to me, so $2.5 million will get you where you need to go. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I said, I'm gonna, you know, bootstrap it and keep everything as tight as I can. And he goes, well, how much would you need if you like really did it? And I was like, oh, probably 4 million would be what I need. He goes, then why are you asking me for 2.5? You know, do the 4. And so the reason I connect those two is that if you cut back somewhere else, you're kind of bootstrapping, right? And where you're cutting back could be an area that you really need. But when you cut back, now you've lost that advantage. Maybe you've lost, you know, maybe you cut back in testing or you cut back in administration. And as you start to scale, you need those people. So now what happens is you got to rehire, you know, as things take off, you got to rehire, you got to retrain. And it's almost like you took, you know, 1 step forward and 2 steps back in certain areas. So that my advice would not be to cut back in other areas. If you're starting to scale, would be to make sure that that's a solid area, and because those areas are going to become critical.
Right. So that's interesting because sometimes I read a few articles that said, usually you have to cut it, but it's interesting because then like the fact that you need to, if you really don't want to cut, then you should ask for, the investor or, the full amount of the investment, right?
Yeah, see, what worries me about cutting back is to me is what I call short-term vision. You're looking at
mm,
what's happening today and not what you need for tomorrow. And
right.
that's where the danger comes in. When you're thinking looking short-term and not long-term, I'm telling you, you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah, I agree. Great. So, sometimes obviously when we have this moment where we need to grow, when we need to scale up, usually founders or startup founders or directors, C-level people want to be involved 100%. Is it really necessary for them to involve themselves 100% on the growth stages, or is it the moments that, or sometimes does a moment arise when they need to actually delegate some tasks and actually, even depend on outsourced talent in order for the growth and scaling to really come into fruition?
Yeah. It's funny. That's a great question, and I have a very strong belief in this one. So my little tagline is grow your people, grow your company. Okay. So I'm a very, very strong believer that if you want to grow your company, you start with your people. And the reason you start with your people is because as the owner, as the C-level, it is impossible for you to be in part of and have your fingers on every aspect of the business. But if you have people that can take care of certain aspects and just report back to you, then you're going to scale. So one of the biggest things as a coach that I have found over the last, probably 10 years of consulting / now I'm coaching, people, is having the owner, the CEO get out of their own way and trust their people, right? And so that's key. And what that means, though, is that you need to, A, make sure you have the right people in the right seat on the bus. B, make sure that you've kind of trained them and you feel confident in their abilities, right? And C, give them before everything starts taking off, start to give them pieces of things to do and just kind of come back to you with, hey, here's what I did here. And then the other thing that's really key that a leader should always do is ask his people, what do they think? And what do they need to be successful? Because the problem is that owners think they know all the answers, and they shouldn't, first of all. They shouldn't have to, second of all. But if they can ask their people, hey, here's what I was thinking about doing here. What are your thoughts? And the person that they're asking is the person that's doing the job. They probably know 10 times better than the owner or the C-level person how to do the job. So let them put their 2 cents in on the best way to do the job. Because here's the thing, the way you do it might take 15 minutes. I'm just picking a number, right? The way they want to do it might only take 10. Now, multiply that out, it's a lot of time that they could be doing something else to help the company. And so those are things that are critical when you're scaling, is to allow your people to actually do their job. And when they do, and here's 2 things that are important. When they do their job, A, they're going to have pride in what they're doing, and B, they're going to go the extra mile. So I'll give you another quick story if I could. When I had Free Drive, we always, every quarter, we took the whole team out. And at this time I had probably 18 people. Okay. But every quarter we would do something. Now I was from Chicago originally, I live in Nashville now, but we went to a Cubs game one time, and I just walked in, I said, all right, by noon, we're all off. We're going to the Cubs game. They're like, yeah. So one day we were on a loft office building above a bar called Jack's Tap. And so I would rent the back room out of the bar, and for 3 hours it was drinks and hors d'oeuvres. And I got up and I was kind of the spokesperson for the company, because that was myself and my business partner. And I was thanking them all. And I said, by the way, I have a question. How many of you have worked a 40-hour work day for us? And the girl raises her hand. She goes, you mean week, right? I said, no, day. She goes, I don't understand. And I said, that's when people like Bunty or Josh would come in on a Monday, and I'd force them to go home on a Wednesday, because they felt so empowered to do their job that they didn't want to leave and make something, they weren't sure if something was going to go wrong. And this is when we were scaling. Now, A, I never asked them to do that. And B, I always, every time I left, I'd go, please go home tonight. So I want to be really clear about that. But they took it upon themselves because they were so part of what we were doing that they were afraid to let the company down and to let us down. And so they were going to do whatever they could to make sure that they went the extra mile. Now, I'm not, again, not advocating 40-hour work days, please. And we gave them a room where they had overstuffed couches and chairs and a fridge full of beer and pool table and video games and movies. And because when you're a programmer, sometimes you just need to step away from it and just let your mind do something else and then come back to it with a fresh mind. So we kind of gave them that room. But my point to that whole story is, when you empower the people, they're going to give it back tenfold because they want the success as well.
That's a great story, and I think that many programmers can relate to that because usually it's very demanding, and the fact that you're waiting or working with a huge screen on your face a lot of the time, that can be tiresome also. So that's great that you have to talk to your people and try to empower them in ways that they feel listened to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is I noticed that it's something that you in your in Pull the Chute in your company, that you try to push that philosophy onto others. So that's really good.
And the other interesting thing too is I'm not only empowering them, but I'm also letting them know that I'm there to support them and to stand shoulder to shoulder with them through difficult situations, right? So they're not on an island by themselves. We're all in this together, and that's another key factor.
Right, definitely. And well, I want to let know everyone in our audience that the Q&A section is open. You can ask questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them on the chat, and I'll go one-on-one and ask them to Jeff on your behalf. But either way, we'll continue to have a conversation. So if you were to give a checklist to people that want to scale up their companies, if you wanted to give this checklist that contained the fundamentals for startups to scale up their operations, what do you think it would contain? Sorry. Is Amby Joseph, is asking, please, Jeff, could you repeat the 3 steps? Number 1, to get the right people on the right seat of the bus. And then I'm guessing the other 2.
Yeah, I think number 2, and again, sometimes I just kind of go off the top of my head here. So, but I think number 2 was make sure that that you let them, that you empower them. Maybe we should use that word, is probably the better thing. And then number 3 is get out of the way, out of your own way. If that's the area that we were talking about.
Oh, great.
As an owner, by the way, get out of the way and just let your people do their jobs. And appreciate them, by the way. That's the other big thing, right? Let them know they're appreciated. The whole Great Resignation is not about money. It's all about people feeling unappreciated at work. And it's a very simple thing to make people feel appreciated and that you care.
Definitely. 100% agree with that. Thanks, Amby, for the question. So yeah, the checklist. If you were to give a checklist with the fundamentals of startups to scale up, what would this checklist contain?
Well, it's a broad spectrum, but fundamentals. All right, so let's look at a couple things. If you're scaling, probably one of the first things you need to do is understand what your systems look like. Because if you're scaling, you're either generating leads or bringing leads in, right? So how are you capturing all that stuff? And keep that all in focus. I mean, the marketing stuff, I'm assuming you're doing. So I look at 5 areas. So I look at marketing, systems, sales, finance, and people. Okay, those are the 5 areas that when I coach, I look at. But I'm gonna jump over marketing because I'm assuming you're marketing, and if you're scaling, that's because you've been marketing. But the next thing I would look at is, what does your systems look like? How are you capturing leads? How are you following up with people? What are you doing for outreach? And some people kick the tires, but you want to keep touching them. So And system isn't all about just a CRM system or capturing leads. It's other things that you're doing. Okay. And then we jump into sales. So what is the sales process, right? And making sure that, the process is set up so that it can scale, and here's the other good thing, knowing that if it's starting to scale and you need another salesperson or two, what are the processes that you have in place that if you bring in 2 new people, give them 2 weeks of training and they should probably be able to go, right? Kind of thing, because you got this step-by-step piece all set up. And you should have that in place, because if you're scaling, that means that some of that stuff is working. What I want you to do is document it though, right? So you can bring in new people. What happens in 90% of the time when I go into a company is nothing is documented. 1 or 2 people know how to do all the stuff. So when you bring in somebody new, you rely on those 1 or 2 people to show them. And because they do it, because they know it so well, they forget steps and they don't always know how to do it. So it's really hard to bring somebody new in. So fundamentally, if you're scaling, start documenting all these little things. And I know it takes time, trust me. Again, put on your calendar, make it an hour a day, and start your day with that. As a matter of fact, I always like to do that. I always like to start my day with something that I don't want to do, but I know has to happen. Because if I start my day with all my other stuff, that'll end up at the bottom of the list and end up the next day, and then the next day, and the next day. I'll just keep pushing it off. Start your day with that for the first hour or half hour. Pick your number, and do that. But that's key. And so from a sales standpoint, I think that's important. Financially, make sure you have somebody either in-house or that you've brought in that's watching all of your numbers for you. One of the biggest issues that you can run into is you're spending way more than you're bringing in and you don't even realize it, right? Especially when you start to scale, because when you start to scale, you're spending like crazy. And so you need to be able to look at those numbers and say, does this make sense? And most everybody on this call, I am sure, has a great idea for a business, but none of us like to do the numbers. It's not what we want to do, right? So find someone that can actually help you do those numbers that you trust, that you can pass that information along. And finally, I go back to people, because it's important to have the right people in play and to have them trained up as you start to scale. And look at all the areas and say to yourself, okay, as we start to scale, what's the area that's going to need the most help right off the bat? Bring a person in there. And then, so kind of prioritize the areas that are going to need help. So you know who you need to bring in first, who you need to bring in second, third, fourth, and so on. And then kind of lay that out. Now, it's hard to do time frames. Like when we scaled, I would have never expected, 1 million users in 13 weeks. Now, once that hit, I knew what to do after that. Okay. So you can't say, okay, like when we write business plans, we say, okay, in 3 months, I'm going to add 2 more people. And then it's hard to know that. Right. But if you can define what area is important to grow first, then that's key, because then you know what you can look for. So those would be the areas that I would focus on.
Okay. That's a very complete checklist, I would say. I hope everyone listened to it, and hopefully, if you didn't have time to catch any of what some things of what Jeff said, don't worry about it, because we are recording the session, and the session afterwards will be sending it to everyone on the call via email, so you'll know, you can watch it later also. And related to, sometimes it's very common for, people in the, especially in the tech industry, to hire outsourced teams so that they can, try come in and do the job as quickly as possible, and then sometimes they exit, and depending on the stage that these companies are in. And so, do you think that sometimes is it recommended or even advised to hire outsourced teams, or even outsourced personnel that might help the company to through this scaling up process, or would you just 100% focus on the in-house team? And I'm asking this because sometimes some outsourced personnel can be actually available for you to hire. So later, if you really like the work of that specific team or that specific developer, you can also bring them to the team. But I don't know if that that might disrupt their perspective on the in-house team, or do you think that it also can help the, bringing someone from the outside to the inside and have a different perspective on the way of doing things?
Yeah, I've used outsource a lot, and it's worked really well when you, when you start to scale. Again, we got caught off guard at Free Drive. I got caught off guard at the 2 million to 24 million. I wasn't expecting that, right? So we brought in an outsourced team that were able to help with the initial influx of, we need a lot of stuff really quick, right? Again, foundationally, take a little bit of time to make sure that you document some of the things that you're doing. Like, I was adamant about my programmers commenting in their code, right? I mean, when they did a certain subroutine, I'm like, I want to see the comment every time. So what you did, because if someone else, and I had two theories. One, you walk off, I hate to say this, but you walk off the curb tomorrow and get hit by a bus, I need to know what the heck you were doing. But B, if I need to bring somebody in, they can look at the code and go, oh, all right, that makes sense. So that the programmer didn't have to spend time explaining it, but that the developer could come in and understand it by just looking at the code, seeing the comments. So, and I know as programmers, and I was one, we hate to do that part. I get it. Again, take that half hour every day, go back and fix or update whatever you need to do it in the morning. But that is critical, because when the influx hits, you're now able to bring somebody in from the outside. Love doing that. And, I'm a firm believer that, just because you live in a particular city doesn't mean you can't, you're limited to the talent, right? So I never limited myself to Chicago talent. I hate to say it that way. It's not that Chicago didn't have talent, but there is talented people all over the world, and I put that in quotes. I want the best of the best, right? And so there might be somebody, in Central America, Latin America, Philippines, you pick your country, that has an amazing talent. And we found two of those guys when I did Free Drive by doing that I don't think I would have ever found had we not brought in outside talent. And they ended up staying with us the whole time then, because they were so good at what they did, right? But you don't know that until you bring them in and see what they can do. But the ability to bring them in and have them help you through the process, especially when it's an influx, and then you can make the decision once the everything kind of slows down a little bit, or you get caught up, if you will, you can make the decision whether or not you want to keep them. But I think it's critical to actually, when you scale unexpectedly, when it catches you off guard, and as much as we plan, as I said to you, kind of try to look out, we don't have the crystal ball. And so we do our best, and everyone needs to realize that we do our best. And there are times when, I always used to tell people, boy, that's a great problem to have, right? If I need to bring somebody else in to help me because I'm scaling so much, I'm doing something right. But if I can avoid, and try and plan for it ahead, I'm going to try and do that.
Definitely. That's happy problems, I would say.
Yeah.
So SC writes, when do you write comments when writing codes?
I always like to do it as I'm doing it. But a lot of times what happens with programmers is they do it, they test it, they do it, they test it. They go, okay, this works. And then their mind takes them to the next thing, right? But, and a lot of times what I always like to do was write why I was putting this, whatever I was doing in, right? And do it more of a question. Hey, I'm trying this because this happened. And that would prompt me all the time to go back and then say, yeah, that worked. Here's what I did, kind of thing.
Okay, great answer. Hope that clarifies, SC. Okay, and I'm interested also to know, because sometimes not all the time is success stories. Sometimes you have to live, or at least see the some failures on companies in order to learn. So I'm interested to know what, like, have you seen any particular huge mistake, not that you've made, but not necessarily, but that you've witnessed in a company that has brought them down, and later on was a good experience for them to rise up or something?
Sure. And trust me, I've had my own.
Yeah.
It's what makes us who we are. And you can have all kinds of successes. I learned far more from the failures. And then when I look at them, I say to myself, okay, I'm never going to allow that to happen again. And it also, it allows me to trial and error a lot of stuff, and see what's going to work best for me and for my company. So again, when I do my coaching, I don't go in and say I have the answers. What I do is I work with you as a client to figure out the best answer for you, because everyone has different aspects and different thought processes and different visions, of where they want to be, right? So I would say that the strongest or the biggest issue that I run into with business owners with, flawed and things they see is that they think they have to have all the answers, and they say they have all the answers when really they don't. But I think, and I'm going to make this sound terrible, but from an egotistical standpoint, they're like, hey, it's my company. I want to go this way. The reality is if you use the people that you have around you and kind of get feedback from them, it may show you a better way. A good friend of mine used to always say, where you start and where you enter are going to be two totally different ideas usually. You think you know exactly where you want to go, but as you go down the path, you go left here and you go right there, and you finally get to where you wanted to get to, but it was a wavy road. And that's okay. There was a lot of lessons learned in that process, but I really believe that not opening yourself up to the possibilities of other solutions, of other ways to do things, is a killer every time. And I've had several business owners that I've consulted for that refused to go. Things were presented to them, ideas were presented to them, and they're like, no, I know better. And the sad news is I've had 3 of those in my career, and all 3 are out of business because they didn't know better. They just thought they knew better, and they wouldn't listen to their people. And that's, again, my tagline, grow your people, grow your company. That is so important because your people are your biggest asset. You think your product is, or your service is, or whatever it is, it's good, it's going to make the money, but it's your people. And because together as a team, that's how you're going to be successful.
Great. Pretty tough moments sometimes, I'm guessing, but definitely, I'm sure that at least I've learned something. So when you're scaling up, do you think that there are some areas that you would need to focus on scaling versus others? For example, I'm just throwing it out there, like maybe you don't want to focus too much on marketing, and you want to focus more about the product development, or services, or different things that sometimes within the scaling up process that might not be a priority for you at the moment. So what is it common for like for the budget to just go to other areas that are deemed more important than others, or?
It can, and I'm gonna. You mentioned something that I want to throw a big warning out for. Never stop marketing, no matter what you're doing. People they go, I got to cut the marketing budget. In my opinion, biggest mistake any company could make. As a matter of fact, you always want to throw a little more money there, because there's important things like when people see your logo, that's your brand, right? And if you stop being out in front of people, you lose your brand identity, right? I always tell people when I meet them, I always say, tell me your 30-second elevator pitch. What's your message, right? And then I say to them, how many employees do you have? Oh, I got 12. If I was to ask all 12 of your employees to give me the 30-second elevator pitch, would they all say it the same? And usually they're like, that's a great question. I have no idea. Well, your employees are your biggest promoters. They go to parties, they go to events, and people say, what do you do? Who do you work for? It happens all the time, right? And to be able to do that 30-second elevator pitch, and for people to go, oh, I get it. That's great, is important. So you said marketing. I would never, ever, reduce anything in marketing. As a matter of fact, that's when you want to accelerate it, because you want to keep the momentum going. Just got to keep pushing. And you got exciting things to talk about. You're scaling, you're growing. right? You're going to get testimonials and you're going to get, all kinds of things that are happening. So critical, because that's the important part. It's really hard. I always look at when I'm scaling is where can I move money around? And how can you make it work? This is going to sound probably pretty tough, but if you're scaling and you're the owner, look in the mirror and say, do I need the salary I'm taking right now? Or could I take a little bit of reduction and move that somewhere else to keep the thing growing? That's sometimes what you have to do as the owner or as the C-level. Because, you got the carrot at the end of the stick there, right? Because if you sell it off, you own a percentage, major percentage of the company. Don't forget that. And I get slack for that from people sometimes. They're like, well, but I need this and this. And I go, yeah, but again, short-term vision will kill the whole thing. Long-term vision is the key. Quit looking at what's right in front of you and look what's out there and how you're going to get there. And so if you have to reduce your salary by a little bit, that's what you got to do. And here's the key to that. How does that look? Perception is reality to a lot of people. How does that look to your employees? You are willing to take and go and do whatever it took to be successful. Guess what? They're going to do the same. And that's the key.
That's great. Great answer. So we're almost at the end of the Symbiosis talk, from startup to scale up. I want to thank everyone who has been asking questions and overall listening to what these very valuable things Jeff has said over the course of this call. So just to give it a closure, what books would you recommend for any startup founder that wants to scale up their business, or any reading material that can help them to study a bit more about this process?
Sure. One of my favorite ones is Rocket Fuel, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it's a really cool book. What it really talks about in that book is the visionary and the integrator. And what's key about that is, a lot of people have a good vision, and let them be that visionary. You need that second person that's that good integrator. And I'll give you an example. Walt Disney has his brother, right? Jobs had Wozniak, Gates had Allen, Standard Oil, I can't remember the guy, but he had a guy. But all the successful ones have that second guy that can make stuff happen, right? And that's what Rocket Fuel is all about. That's a good one. And the other one I'll promote that hopefully is out by the end of the year is my own. It's called Pull the Chute, Grow Your People, Grow Your Company. We're in the final stages of that, so that should be coming out. But it kind of walks you through little things that you can do that are going to help your company grow to the next level and scale. So be on the lookout for that one.
Congrats for your own book, and hopefully it will see the light of day soon. And well, what's next for Jeffrey?
I'll tell you, I always tell people there's a few important birthdays in your life. When you turn 16 in the US, you can drive. When you're 21, you're legal. When you turn 40, statistically, your life is half over. And you look at your bucket list and you say, what do you want to do? And that's when I went skydiving. Okay. And then recently I turned 60 and I looked in the mirror and said, okay, I love working. I love helping companies. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I said, you know what? I at least want 10 more years where I can help as many companies as possible grow and be the best they can be. And so that's why I started Pull the Chute, to be honest. I love coaching. I love helping companies grow. I love taking my years of experience and being able to help companies figure things out. I don't have all the answers, but you know what? I'm going to ask a lot of the questions, and together we'll come up with an answer that, and I said this earlier, that you can live with and work with. And that's sometimes all you need. You just need someone to kind of look at things differently. One of the best lines is people always say, I like to think out of the box. I always like to say, there is no box. You can just be you. Why do you need a box? Why do you need to be out of the box? Just forget there's a box at all. Right? And let's figure out how to get to where you want to get to. So what's next for me is to help as many companies. That's why I have my own podcast, I'm getting ready to launch what I call PTC. So it stands for Pull the Chute, PTC TV. And we're starting a series called The Journey, which is where we're going to interview business owners and talk about their journey, why they started, when they started, what are some of the challenges, some of the things that we talked about today, right? And learn from them. And the goal there is, here's what happens. Everybody on this call is probably has their own company or is trying to figure it out. You're not alone. I mean, sometimes we think that we're the only ones going through a certain situation. Hopefully this, the Journey YouTube channel will help people realize they're not the only ones going through it. And so that's actually a good feeling, because you kind of look in the mirror and you say, why is this happening to me? And there's thousands of other people that the same thing happened to. And guess what? Talk to them or hear from them and find out how they got through it. What wakes you up every morning and makes you want to go to work for your own company? I want to know that, right? What drives you? And that's the important stuff. So that's what's next for me, is really just continuing to grow and to help companies be the best they can be and have fun doing it.
That's great, Jeff. That's a really good answer. We wish you success in all these future projects. I want to thank you and thank the team for being here, and everyone that's watching this and hopefully that has watched this recording. Thank you very much. Where can everyone contact you or follow you?
Sure. So my website is pullthechute.net, or you can email me, jeff@pullthechute.net. And man, I'd love to hear from you. If you're just looking for some thoughts, please don't hesitate. I love, my goal is just to help. Obviously, I want to make money doing it at some point, but I don't need to do that on everybody. So just understand that it's just fun for me to offer advice sometimes. And if that turns into a long-term relationship and something that we can do together, I'd love to do that as well.
Great. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. And be sure to read our future emails, because we also have a next speaker coming up in October. I think that it will be very valuable for everyone. But after we send you the recording, we'll be sure to send you the invitation for the next event too. So thank you everyone so much. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Simbiosis team. And we'll see each other on the next Simbiosis Talks.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.